Dave, we are back from a much-needed bye week. This is game week, and what do we give the folks when it's game week?
Everybody, your favorite segment is back. Know your foe. That's right. We're sitting down with Dalton Pence of Locked On Louisville to talk everything Louisville. Scott Satterfield, Malik Cunningham. Who's going to win this game? You're going to find out.
And folks, thank you guys so much for being Locked On Seminoles. You first listen each and every single day. And with that being said, let's go on with the show.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Seminoles. What's up, everybody? It's your boy Drake here. And not only do I have Dave here, but I have our very own from the Locked On Louisville podcast, Mr. Dalton Pence from the show for our Know Your Foe series on the Louisville Cardinals as FSU travels to Bourbon Country this Friday. Dalton, what's going on, my guy?
Oh, not much. I appreciate y'all fellas having me on.
No worries. We love having you on. We love having you on. But before we go, I guess, deeper into, the team itself, I want to know, tell our fans, actually, what's your background covering the team, and also, what made you come into, being a fan of the Louisville Cardinals and covering them as well?
Yeah, so, I'm born and raised in the Derby City. I graduated from the university in 2019, lifelong fan. Basically began covering the team as a football beat writer, which kind of then stemmed into being a recruiting analyst, and then just a plethora of different things, covering all of Louisville sports across the board. And then, joined the Locked On a year ago last August. So it's been pretty neat. This is second year on the gig with Locked On. So yeah, we're
full ours too, actually, I think, right?
Yeah, it is. We're getting close too. Yeah. And first time we've had a happy time around the podcast being 2-0, but we'll get into that.
Must be nice.
Must be nice. Hey, listen, the past two times that we faced y'all, I'm pretty sure that y'all basically ran us out of town. And also, I remember specifically a Heisman campaign starting when we visited y'all back in 2016. So
we're good at that.
Yeah.
We're good at doing that.
Still my favorite Louisville football game of all time.
I'm sure you were there.
Oh, that's
you guys are still scoring somewhere in a parallel universe. So,
man, I'll be honest. Before we get in the show, I'll give you a little backstory. That college game day, first time I remember. I'm only 24, so I can't tell you the last time before that Louisville had a college game day, like a true one that I felt like we came in having a true chance. And, I was like, oh, my gosh, Dalvin Cook has torched us for, his whole career. And then, from the very beginning, it was like, okay, this really can't be happening. And then the infamous spin move at the end, I think that's kind of what Louisville fans like, oh, my, this is real life. And, unfortunately, the train went off the track shortly after in the coming weeks. But nonetheless, we had a little bit of a high for a couple of weeks. So.
Yeah, we have a selective memory. We choose not to remember that game. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, actually, I got to see Lamar Jackson. I went up to Baltimore for law school, so seeing him in person. It hits a little bit different. But we're not here to talk about the past. We're talking about the future. And currently, your future of the Louisville Cardinals is with Scott Satterfield. The first season came out pretty well. See the explosive plays. He took advantage of basically a Tutu Atwell, Javian Hawkins. However, year before and kind of heading into this year, it kind of seems that Scott Satterfield's kind of lost favor with the Louisville fan base. So I kind of want to test the temperature. How do you and how's the fan base as a whole feel about Scott Satterfield heading into the season?
Well, heading into the season, I think that, after year 3, after getting blown out to Kentucky in the rivalry game, losing to Air Force in the bowl game, a lot of people realized that changes were going to need to be made. And there was a very, very real possibility that Satterfield was going to get fired after year 3 and enter Jeff Brom into the mix. It was a very, very real possibility. Looked like it was almost a lock to happen. And then out of nowhere, Satterfield stays. Louisville loses their president and athletic director in 2 days combined, which was wild. But year 4, a lot needed to be changed. Obviously, the recruiting momentum kind of alleviated some of those concerns, or it more or less took the Barbarians away from the gate for the time being. But it was all about getting the results on the field. The loss against Syracuse was worst case scenario because it brought the Barbarians back to the gate. Central Florida has the team kind of at bay in terms of the fan base, but I'll be honest. I think that there was a couple of media personnel that went on the national TV here in Louisville and basically said this may be Scott Satterfield's most important game in his tenure here at Louisville. And I think that although I don't necessarily maybe agree with that as much as I understand the gravity of the situation. So I would be lying if I said things were going peachy right now. The temperature is, I'm not going to say scalding hot, but it's pretty warm, and the results are going to have to come.
Yeah, and we'll get more into Malik, but you guys have this incredible stretch of quarterbacks going back to Teddy Bridgewater and Lamar Jackson and now Malik Cunningham. It feels like if you guys don't have a great year, it's just going to be a waste of his talent. What exactly does Scott Satterfield have to do with Malik Cunningham, probably in his last year at Louisville, I imagine, unless things go crazy south, to remain the head coach and gain back the favor of the fan base?
Well, like I said, it's about results. I think that if you gauged the consensus of the fan base, the general idea or the belief is that if Louisville gets at least 6 wins, you can deal with it. My expectation coming into the season is I wanted Louisville to win 7. Anything more was a cherry on top, but anything less, and you're kind of like, decisions could be made. Yeah. So, and that's why the game against Syracuse was so pivotal, because the back half of the schedule for Louisville, it's brutal. So, Syracuse, who knows how good the Orange truly are, but it was definitely a letdown. So that's why games like Florida State, these toss-up games, Boston College, Virginia, there is so much, heading into these games, because there's a good chance Louisville might not win a lot in the back half of the schedule. So to answer your question, it's all about the results. There's no moral victories. The past 2 years have been about, well, we were right there knocking on the door. Year 4, can't really use that. 18 or so returning starters, can't really use that. Malik Cunningham back, like you said, you can't really use that anymore. It's all about getting into the win column.
Okay, I could definitely feel that. And I've just actually pulled up your schedule, and excuse me for looking over to my monitor over here, that you do end up basically, Dave, they actually play Pitt, Wake Forest, JMU, which actually is a pretty good FCS team, Clemson, NC State, and the last game is at Kentucky. So that is kind of a rough schedule. Actually, we had an episode about a month and a half ago discussing our FSU schedule. We're like, it's kind of rough, but it's not terrible. But seeing your schedule and also Georgia Tech schedule, it makes us feel actually a lot better immensely.
No kidding.
And then before we get into the Malik Cunningham talk, I do want to ask you before we do that. So you've seen the Syracuse versus Louisville game, and then you had the UCF game last week. Where do you feel this team basically? Because I felt I was watching 2 different teams against Syracuse, where Syracuse we kind of see now as like a better of a team, but Garrett Schrader and Sean Tucker both actually performed extremely well in those games. And then you had the UCF game where it felt like Louisville played much better, but also that UCF kind of gave the game away. Like, where do you feel this team right now is at when it comes to the two?
I think you're right. There was a distinctive difference between week 1 and week 2. Week 1, simply the team didn't look like they cared. They came out flat. They came out unprepared. Syracuse seemed like they wanted it more. There's not one aspect of the game that I looked at and I was like, you know what? The Cardinals did that well. There was nothing there. Week 2, you saw some improvement. Malik Cunningham looked more comfortable. Scott Satterfield said after the game that, basically we allowed him to, be more of himself rather than trying to force him into being a true pocket passer, which 6 years into his career here at Louisville, we know that he is not a true pocket passer. He's more of the hybrid dual threat. I think that Louisville and UCF took turns trying to plead with the other team to win the game, and both teams just kept deferring and disagreeing until the end of the game, and Louisville was ahead at the end when the clock hit 000. So some decent, like Louisville's defense. I had an episode earlier. I think that Louisville's defense had one of the best halves I've seen them play since Charlie Strong, defensively. And this is the Louisville defense that we're going to talk about here in a minute. Scares me because they haven't really been all that great, and there's questions regarding the schemes of the defensive coordinator that Louisville fans have had, but I think that the thoughts behind the team right now is that you saw some of that potential in week 2, but there's no way you can be content because there's so much still needing to work on. And if Louisville puts the performance that they had on the field this past week against Florida State, I mean, we're talking about a multiple touchdown win for the Seminoles because really wasn't that good of a performance. Almost, 100 penalty yards, turnovers, missed field goals, missed open receivers, missed tackles. This is like the first week that I feel like Louisville's going up against a true good quarterback. I mean, Garrett Schrader and John Rice Plumlee, no disrespect to either, converted wide receivers that make their mark as dual threats. You'll learn that I'm a little higher on Jordan Travis than some of my fellow Louisville fans. But yeah, I mean, I think that this week it's all about just continuing to get better. And I'll be honest, I don't necessarily feel the greatest about the matchup.
Sorry to pull you guys away from the wonderful sit-down we have going on right now with Mr. Dalton Pence on Locked On Louisville, but we'd be remiss here at Locked On Seminoles. We're talking about friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your latest sports matches, whether it be NHL, NBA, MLB heading into the playoffs, or always college football heading into Week 3. Simply go over to BetOnline today. Use promo code LOCKEDON, that's LOCKEDON, to get a 100% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Once again, use promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, BetOnline, where the game starts.
And we'll get to those predictions and we'll get to that defense. But you mentioned real great quarterback, and that to me is Malik Cunningham too. We did this exercise here a few months ago where we said we went through each of the ACC quarterbacks, and it's loaded, the ACC obviously. And we said, who would we take over Jordan Travis? There was only a couple I chose, and Malik Cunningham was one of those. His running ability is special. Like Jordan Travis, he's shown the ability to throw the ball at a high level. This year feels weird. You can look at his stats, you can watch him play, you can get into the advanced stats. Doesn't matter where you look. It doesn't quite feel like the same Malik Cunningham. Is it him? Is there something different in Malik Cunningham, or is it the team around him, like the receiving core and the offensive line? What exactly is it that we're seeing different out of Malik Cunningham?
I think roster personnel-wise, I think that this team is honestly better than they were last year. They have, like I said, a lot of returning starters. You did lose some receivers, but I'll be honest. I mean, the losses of Tyler Harrell, Jordan Watkins, Justin Marshall, it's expendable. They are replaceable. And you brought in a guy like Tyler Hudson, who I'm very high on, D. Wiggins. Then you got guys like Braden Smith, who literally was out for the season when we played Florida State, went down in that game, didn't have him again. Amari Huggins, Bruce is back. Marshawn Ford, one of the best conference tight ends, and almost all of the starting line. And then you insert Tyon Evans into the mix. There was no reason why Louisville's offense couldn't take the next step forward. It comes down to play calling and the lack of predictability, or I should say, the predictability that this team has shown on offense. It's really hindered what they've been able to do. One of the reasons why the Louisville fan base has been kind of critical is that Scott Satterfield's offense is a run predominant offense, which that is what it is, but it's so predictable. Like last week, second and long was almost always run plays. And statistically, I think like the net gain was like plus 2 yards out of like 9 or 10 second and long runs. And that's just not a recipe for success. No matter how good your offense is, if you're consistently in third and long situations, you're going to struggle. Like I said, Malik Cunningham didn't necessarily play his game week 1. Week 2, he looked a lot better. Looked like the Malik that we knew, and he looked a lot better. But still, it seems like they need to open the playbook up even more. Now, granted, I will tell you, through the first 2 weeks last year, Cunningham wasn't that good either. Through the first 2 weeks, it took him a little while. It took to that UCF game in week 3 last year for him to get in his bag, so to speak. I would expect for him to start turning it up as the year goes along, but make no mistake about it, he needs some help in terms of the play calling. And I'm not saying that you have to completely ditch the scheme, but switch it up a little bit. Throw some gadget plays, some end arounds. Just play to Malik's strengths without making it so brutally obvious as to what you're doing, because I mean, they telegraphed what they've been doing at certain times during Syracuse and Central Florida. And listen, I feel like it's kind of a case like LSU. I think LSU kind of telegraphed some of the plays in their week 1 against Florida State, and the defensive players for the Seminoles kind of were able to kind of sit into their zone and just allowed LSU to run right into their trap. So I don't think it's a personnel issue. I think it's more so a schematic issue, but also make no mistake about it, Malik has to, perform better in all facets of the game.
I will say, I think you're the first person I've heard say something nice about D. Wiggins when it comes to playing wide receiver. Because I'm from the South Florida area. I do know he's a Miami transfer, even though he's famously known as basically burning Stanford Sam as Levante Taylor for a long touchdown against us, and where Stanford Sam put his hands up like this, being like, because he's a solid player, and I think Marshawn Ford too as well is a good option. But you do lose Tyler Harrell, who was supposed to be kind of the number one guy at Alabama. Unfortunately, he has been hurt for the majority of the year. So the offense as a whole, it's kind of interesting how you're saying where it's not personnel, but it's something that me and Dave discussed with Mike Norvell, where last season with Ken Dillingham, the former OC, that it's the personnel, it's the play calling that might be the issue. And I don't think that's something that any of the fan base has heard so far yet.
Yeah, and piggyback.
I will say, just to add in real quick, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah,
Tyler Harrell, there's no doubt in my mind he's one of the most talented players in college football. You see the talent. He's fast as can be. He's
so
one of the fastest. I mean, he's probably the fastest receiver in college football. The thing about it is, Louisville's not an offense that utilizes the deep routes, that goes deep a lot. So as fast as Tyler Harrell is, I feel like his skill set wasn't necessarily tailor-made for this offense. So, schematically speaking, it's more of an intermediate offense to where, guys like Amari Huggins, Bruce, maybe not necessarily straight line, quick guys, but, very twitchy, smaller receivers that get into the slot like Tutu Atwell, throwing it out into space and letting guys operate into space. And Tyler Harrell really didn't show all that much of a potential, but he was extremely electric in the deep ball game. But that's not Louisville's MO. So that's why, as an athlete and as a player, it's hard to replace someone of his talent. But schematically, for a player that didn't necessarily fit all the way into the Louisville offense, it's definitely manageable.
Yeah, and one thing that I found really interesting that you said is that Malik looked a lot better throwing the ball against UCF. That's interesting because you just look at the raw the raw passing stats, and he had under 50% completions. Only the third time that's happened in the last 3 seasons for him. Is Malik Cunningham able to just go out and win the game purely on his arm? Is the personnel there for him to do that? Is he able to do that, or does he have to run the ball for the Louisville Cardinals to win games?
I mean, if you are breaking it down that way, do I think he has the talent to go out and throw his way down the field to win games? I think he does. Now, obviously, the accuracy has to be spot on. And really, I think that he looked better throwing the ball last week simply because against Syracuse, he did not look good at all. So it was more so a testament to how bad he looked week 1 rather than how good he looked week 2, just because he was making throws that, consistency was an issue, but he was making the throws that we were hoping to see in week 2, or I'm sorry, week 1. Yeah, I mean, I think that could he win it with his arm? Possibly, but there will be no chance in hell that Louisville would ever let that happen because, you take away his main, go-to, style of play. Malik Cunningham is as dangerous as he is because of that ability to scramble. So maybe, he's not necessarily a Lamar Jackson level, type player, which I'm not sure that will be again. Right.
That's a once in a lifetime type of thing, man.
but that's the thing about it is like Malik, if you take away his rushing ability, then he probably is more so of an average player, but at the end of the day, he has that for a reason. And because he has that strength, you're going to see Louisville always utilize that. Now, obviously, if they need to throw their way down the field in a 2-minute situation and he has to go 80 yards or so, maybe a little bit of a different situation, but I think that's where, Malik still has that talent. Now, it's a matter of consistently putting it out there. There's been flashes over the past couple of years, him looking a lot better as a passer as the years go on. But like you said, I think that, if that rushing attack isn't clicking, if he's not truly effective in that area, it kind of doesn't necessarily make Louisville's offense one-dimensional, but it really takes away a big advantage because that's been one of Louisville's biggest advantages since 2019 or so.
Right. And I asked that mostly because, again, Syracuse, looking at the box score, he only had 34 rushing yards. And it feels like it's not a coincidence that he posted such a low rushing total. And you guys had, like you said, almost a worst case scenario game. So curious to see if if the Florida State defense is intent on stopping him from running the ball, is Louisville comfortable just going to the passing game and saying, screw it, we don't even need that?
Here's the thing about it is, I really am I'm a big fan of Malik. I'll be honest, which a lot of Louisville fans are, but there's a sector of Louisville's fan base that doesn't necessarily believe in the hype as a pocket passer because of, like you said, statistically, it just doesn't kind of get backed up, especially
That
these
sounds
past
very,
weeks.
very familiar, like our own fan base here with Jordan
Yeah.
Travis. I ain't gonna
Yeah.
lie to you.
So, but we've seen it in a lot of it. It doesn't get easy when you have play calling that tries to really force the issue on the ground, so you don't get the opportunity to see Malik Cunningham throw the ball over 30 times a game. But he shows the ability that when you give him RPOs, when you give him ability to, he's one of the most efficient pocket passers under a clean pocket over the past 3 years in college football. And I think that there's no coincidence in realizing that when the Louisville offensive line, it's pretty solid. It looks solid against UCF finally. But when he has the opportunity to sit in the pocket and throw, more oftentimes than not, he looks solid. But it's hard to look good when you're consistently, battling off the third and longs to where, defenses are able to throw different packages at you and you're forced to really, make things happen. So I think that Malik hasn't gotten a fair shake of things because the play calling really is kind of like a snowball effect. Now, if Louisville were to start passing a little bit more on, first down or even second and long, I think that might look a little different. But I think that talent-wise, I think Malik's got all the talent to, be able to dissect any team throughout the air because they do have the athletes out wide. You have Marshawn Ford, who's a human mismatch. Like I said, my question is why not? But statistically speaking, I think it kind of skews the reasoning a little bit when you don't necessarily watch Louisville every single game, every single play. Obviously, I don't watch Florida State every single game, every single play, but it doesn't tell the full tale. Although I will say statistically, definitely not living up to the expectations through 2 weeks.
No, I can feel that. And let's go over from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive side of the ball, which is one thing that surprisingly, doing my research for today, that I saw that Louisville has the 19th ranked rush defense in the entire country, which is something that I kind of found surprising. And also, judging by your face, you're also surprised with that fact?
Yeah, I didn't know that at all. I thought it was actually pretty worse than that, if I'm being honest. Statistically speaking, didn't look good. Sean Tucker, let's be honest.
It's Sean Tucker.
Sean Tucker is literally, I had 2 months to tell Louisville fans why he was a top 5 running back in college football. And people,
It's Syracuse.
People clowned me.
Syracuse, yeah.
People clowned me because we held him in check over the course of last year's game. That was definitely not the case at all. That definitely does surprise me. But it's also been the fact that week 1 the defense could not tackle me out there. Week 2, obviously a little different. But I'm really, really surprised that they're 19th in the country because I thought it was a lot worse than that.
I'll double check that to make sure if that's correct, but that's from what I'm seeing.
Regardless, that is kind of the main issue for me because I know that Florida State through 2 games is the number 1 rushing attack in the ACC, averaging 269 yards on the ground, and they do it with a very balanced attack. So, and Louisville as well, there's 4 guys that can hurt you in the Louisville backfield. So I know the advantage of having 4 different guys at your disposal that you can throw out there, and it's really a headache for opposing defensive coordinators.
Okay, so for the casual fan, I think the casual Florida State fan doesn't think much of Louisville's defense. And if you happen to be more than a casual fan and go on to PFF, you see that Louisville doesn't have a defender graded 70 or above on the year for this year. So what exactly is the big picture story with this Louisville defense? What are they good at in light of the low ratings overall?
Well, I'll be completely honest with you. I'm not a huge fan of Pro Football Focus. I do think that they're right on this stance because I think that there's a lot to be desired from the Louisville defense. And I think, honestly, a lot of my gripes with Pro Football Focus is with the NFL side of things, more so with college. So I give it a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. But Louisville's defense, a lot of it has been schematics as well. Last year, not really rushing a lot of guys, rushing 3, dropping 8, and playing a zone defense and allowing opposing receivers just to get into the cracks and crevices in the open field and just pick Louisville's defense apart. Chunk plays at a time, 10 yards, 12 yards, 15 yards until you're in the red zone and Louisville's defense. And obviously, I think that they got better as the year went along, but those were some of the issues against Syracuse, where Garrett Schrader, who's never in his career been known as a pocket passer, he was a wide receiver before transferring to Syracuse, and he's just finding these receivers. And they're like, Garrett Schrader is one of the best quarterbacks in week 1. I'm like, dude, I can throw it to open receivers. I mean, only a couple times were guys really even truly marked. A little bit different week 2 when they brought the pressure in the second half. And look what it did. You made life hell for John Rice Plumlee, and you allowed one drive over 40 yards in the second half for a Gus Malzahn offense. That's pretty incredible to do, especially in the bouncy house. I think the MO for this Louisville defense is that they have the personnel. That's why it's been frustrating. You know, you have guys like Kendrick Duncan Jr., who's top 5 in solo tackles through 2 weeks. Kittrell Clark, he's one of the best cornerbacks in the ACC. Y'all might not necessarily be high on Jarvis Brownlee, but he's a solid secondary or tertiary level cornerback for us, at least. He has been. Quincy Riley, Middle Tennessee State transfer, has been solid linebacking core. Did lose Jermaine Lole to a season-ending injury, which is a big blow to the interior defensive line, but they've got some solid pass rushers and Yaya Diaby and Ashton Gelati. I guess I say all that to say this: the personnel's there. The personnel is there for this defense to be successful, but it seems like at times maybe they aren't necessarily put in the greatest positions to succeed in terms of the base packages. But there has been a lot of criticism for Brian Brown, the defensive coordinator. With the criticism, I have to praise him for his style of play in the second half, because we showed when you rush, when you bring the house and you force a guy to go against his strengths, good things happen. Now, obviously, it's going to be a little different with Jordan Travis and the Florida State rushing attack, but the potential is there. And I think that's what frustrates Louisville fans the most.
I understand that. Also, for one thing, I will say I was incorrect. They actually are 19th worst in the country when it comes to rush defense. So that makes a little bit.
I was about to say, I think
my apologies on that.
They allow over like 250 on the ground, which kind of scares me because Florida State. I'll be honest with you. I watched all of the LSU Florida State game, and I was impressed with Jordan Travis. And now, granted, I think we also have to ask the question, realistically, how good is LSU in game 1 under Brian Kelly when they lost so much from the Ed Ogeron era, right? Yeah. So, we'll see, but I think you have to give credit to the Seminoles for handling business and doing what they have to do. So I do want to ask you all, for my personal
right ahead.
Aspect of things, what is your all's take on this team right now? Are they obviously 2-0? It's hard to really read too much into it, and it can kind of be almost counterintuitive to do so. What's your all's take on this team this year? Are we looking at a team that could win 8 games? What's the Florida State of 2022 looking like?
So for me personally, not speaking for Dave, I was in the camp that this was a team that can win 8, should win 7, will win 6, primarily because what we saw, Mike Norvell had 8 wins over his first 2 seasons. And he didn't match Willie Taggart, who was only here for a year and a half for total wins, until he beat Duquesne 2 weeks ago.
Right.
So it's one of those things where it's like, I couldn't give too much faith, but when you see the drubbing of Duquesne, which I know it's not that much, but this is also the same program who struggled with Jacksonville State the year before, and then we lost them outright last year. But then you see with the LSU game, that was a game that we would typically end up losing in the end because of some boneheaded plays, especially some of the boneheaded play calling. And that's one of the things where Gus Malzahn and Mike Norvell have a very similar base packaging, and they have a similar kind of play calling. And also that's where basically the ugly head kind of rears out when Mike Norvell gets into the clutch time. But to me, for right now, you see Jordan Travis improve as a passer, which is something that Dave has heard me kind of be having a mea culpa the past few weeks, because I was one of those people in the camp where I didn't believe JT could actually develop into this great of a passer, and we're seeing him do that as we speak before our very eyes. To me, this is a team that not only can win 8, I think sneakily they actually can win 9 games this season, and that's mainly because we haven't been 2-0 in a very long time. So maybe I'm very hyped. To me, this Louisville game, if we win this game, we confidently should win this game, that we should actually probably go on and win 9 games for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I'll say this about this Florida State team. I think we share a lot of your same frustrations. Like the personnel this year in particular, too, feels like it's all there. This is one of the best defensive lines, not just in the ACC, but in the country. We finally got Tatum Bethune from UCF to make the linebacking core more solid. The DBs are all blue chip prospects. They always are at Florida State. Offensive side of the ball, we haven't given Jordan Travis any help at wide receiver. Finally, we take a 500,000 transfers at wide receiver, and it looks like that's finally put him over the ledge for being able to, play like he is right now. And so it's funny because that segues into, I think, probably the last segment, but it feels like before the season, I said Louisville was a guaranteed loss. I said I had no room for budging on that because I thought Malik was just too good. And
as you can tell, he's a big Malik Cunningham fan. As you can tell
am.
The way
I don't blame him. I am as well.
And so this game now, to me, after 2 weeks, if you call it a knee jerk, because it probably is, it feels like a game that Florida State probably should win now. And we're slightly favored, so that's not that crazy. But is Louisville going to win this game, Dalton?
I'm 0-2 on my predictions this year.
Flip it. Do the opposite.
I predicted a Syracuse win. I was wrong. I predicted a UCF win. I was also wrong. I'm predicting a Florida State win. I think that this is the best team so far that Louisville's played. I'm actually higher on Florida State than a lot of Louisville fans, although Louisville fans are kind of, from a consensus point of view, a lot of people are expecting this to possibly go wrong quickly. There is kind of a, giddy optimism, and kind of a, just kind of a, homerism, hoping that this team puts it all together. Because would it surprise me if Louisville went into this game and won? No, I mean, they've got the pieces to do so. I mean, Scott Satterfield literally has not lost to Florida State in his tenure at Louisville. He has the blueprint to beat Mike Norvell. He's done it 3 times, and some of those wins have been pretty convincing. But I will say that Florida State is probably the best that they've been under Norvell as well. They have a lot of good, solid supporting pieces, but you have to be able to limit those mental mistakes that have really harmed this team for the past 2 years. You have to, take away the predictability on offense and make things a little bit different on defense. So, to make a long rationale short, I think that Florida State wins this game. I think we're probably looking anywhere from about 7 to about 13 points. I do want to give credit to Louisville a little bit. I think that they're going to play probably better than they have, but I haven't seen a lot in the first 2 weeks that leads me to believe, the Cardinals are going to win this one.
I think this is going to be like a 3 to 7 point kind of win. I think it's definitely going to be close because this is the one thing where, Dave, we've seen this for the past few years where after a big win the week after, that's why we're kind of thankful we had a bye week. You go into the next week not really caring that much. We beat UNC week 1, and then we played, actually, ironically, we played y'all and lost 48-16 or 48-10, something like that. And then last year, we almost beat Notre Dame, and then we lose Jacksonville State. So then I do want to ask you, if Louisville does find a way to win, what is the reason why? And outside of Malik Cunningham, is there a specific player or a specific sort of basically scheme or theme that you have that basically can guide Louisville to victory?
Well, I think for the Cardinals defensively, it is getting into the backfield. Forcing Jordan Travis to get uncomfortable and forcing him to make decisions a little bit quicker than he's used to making. I feel like that's kind of cliche, but we've seen that when the Louisville defense is able to create pressure for opposing teams, good things happen, obviously. But I think that the biggest key to this game is offensively. I think that they have to set the tone up front. Louisville's offensive line looked solid last week against UCF, and they're going to be a solid offensive line. I mean, you return 4, actually really 5 starters, and one of them is Caleb Chandler, who's one of the best guards in the country. But Florida State, one of the best defensive lines in the country, like you said. So something has to give for Malik Cunningham and the Louisville offense, especially in the rushing attack, for them to have some success. They're going to have to set the tone. They're going to have to create some gaps. They're going to have to give Malik Cunningham some time to throw the football. And if they don't, it's going to be a long night.
Okay, well, hopefully we won't hear Yaya Diaby's name too much because that's one player that I saw. I think he was on the athletics list of 1 to 100 top freaks actually in the entire country. And then also Ashton was a Gilletti. He's also another player that actually beginning to watch. Believe Malik Cunningham's going to have to, take care of someone by the name of Jared Verse, who I think kind of announced himself to the world on Labor Day weekend. But Dalton, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a blast finally having you on here. Please let the folks know where they can follow you and follow your work.
Yeah, at @dpence_ is the personal Twitter, at @LL_Louisville for the Locked On Twitter family. Yeah, like I said, YouTube, all the streaming services out there. You can find all my work basically on my Twitter. All the links are in there and stuff like that. So pretty straightforward, just at @dpence_.
Give the man a follow. Gives out great content. And Dave, send us home, my guy.
All right. So are you telling me to tell them where to find the podcast and the YouTube, Drake?
Find out where they can find our podcast and where they can find his YouTube.
Yes.
We'll do on our YouTube and his YouTube.
Yes. Okay. You can find us anywhere you find your podcast: Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Google Play. And for the YouTube, if you like the video, which you should, give it a like. Subscribe to the channel. Ding the little bell at the top. It'll tell you when the episodes drop. And leave us some comments below. Did you disagree with our takes? Tell us why Florida State's going to win convincingly.
And also tell us why the Louisville is no slouch to be slept on, because I feel this game is going to be a lot closer than what you're talking about. But with that being said, this was Drake, that was Dave, and that was Dalton from Locked On Louisville. And we'll see y'all next time on Locked On Seminoles. Take care, everybody.
Go ACC.
Go ACC.